While everyone watches Ukraine, Gaza bursts into the headlines, and Taiwan is at the center of analysts' attention. A crisis is brewing right at the borders of the United States, the consequences of which could reshape the entire Western security system. Not through conflicts, not through military bases, but through a silent, almost imperceptible revolution of alliances. And it's happening not in Europe, not in Asia, but in Canada. Let me warn you, this topic is complex, ambiguous, multi-layered. But it is from such topics that real geopolitics is made. Today, I will tell you why Canada, America's closest and most predictable partner, for the first time in a century, is quietly but decisively stepping back from America. And what this means not only for the White House, but also for the entire NATO structure, world energy, and the global trade order. If you think that the alliance between the USA and Canada is something like an eternal agreement between two friends who simply shake hands and move forward, then you are in for a surprise. Because right now, in the closed offices of Ottawa, meetings are taking place where nothing less than the foundations of military and political partnership with the USA are being questioned. This is not an ultimatum, not a scandal. It is a surgically precise reassessment of all lines of dependency on the White House. Sources close to the Canadian National Security Committees have already confirmed. An idea is maturing within the government that would have been considered heretical 5 years ago. What if the USA is no longer a guarantor of stability? What if the White House is no longer an anchor but a storm? Prime Minister Mark Carney, known for his composure and analytical style, stated plainly yet clearly in the corridors of Parliament, "We cannot and should not entrust our national defense to anyone else." This signal in Parliament sounded almost quietly, without hysteria, but its consequences spread like geopolitical ripples across the water. The answer lies in the very structure of American power. The foreign policy direction changes too often. Every 4 years, there's a new president, a new team, new rules. First, George W. Bush, active intervention, then Obama, soft power, then Trump, trade wars, then Biden, partial rehabilitation of alliances. For Canada, this is too unstable a foundation on which to build long-term defense and trade plans. Add to this the trade wars. In 2018, Donald Trump imposed tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum under the pretext of a threat to U.S. national security. Canada found itself on a list with Russia and China. An ally? It doesn't seem like it. Canada responded with reciprocal measures, but the residue remained. Trust was cracked. Later came new restrictions on agricultural products, on energy resources, on access to infrastructure projects. All of this was perceived in Ottawa not as policy, but as a blow from a friend. New military ties, first steps towards autonomy. When the French nuclear submarine Barracuda entered the port of Halifax, few outside the military community understood that this was not a visit, but a message. France, like Australia, the United Kingdom, and New Zealand, is part of Canada's new axis of trust. And this is not a metaphor. Canada signed a $6 billion contract not with American corporations, but with an Australian manufacturer of radar systems. American giants, Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Northrop Grumman lost. By the way, this is the first major defense deal in the last 20 years in Canada without U.S. participation. And now Canada is considering rejecting the 5th-generation F-35 fighters in favor of the Rafale or Swedish Gripen. This is a geopolitical slap. Such a move means that NATO is no longer seen as monolithic, and U.S. leadership is no longer axiomatic. Canada, Australia, the United Kingdom, New Zealand. They all share a common language, legal system, approach to democracy, and, most importantly, a high level of trust. These countries are forming a new platform for partnership outside NATO. This alliance could become an alternative to unpredictable alliances dependent on U.S. domestic politics. In addition to defense, Canada is beginning to rethink its energy policy. The company Snam, Italy, is already discussing the construction of transatlantic hydrogen hubs that will allow Canada to export resources directly to Europe, bypassing American infrastructure. This is more than diversification. It is strategic autonomy, and it will affect not only energy, but also logistics, high technology, and infrastructure solutions. Data from 2024 show that Canada's exports to the USA fell by 9%, while to Europe and Asia, they increased by 14%. Particularly active markets are Germany, France, and South Korea. Now, pay attention. For the first time in history, the level of investment bids from EU countries in Canada has exceeded the level from the USA. This is an economic indicator of a change in vectors. Above all, this is an example of how autonomous partnerships can be built without falling under geopolitical pressure. Germany, long tired of the double standards of the USA in energy and defense, is closely watching how Canada breaks its mono-dependency calmly, methodically, without scandals. This creates a precedent, and perhaps a model for future alliances on equal terms, without dictates, without slogans about leadership. The issue is not about conflict. It's about maturity. Canada is simply ceasing to be the younger brother. It is building a new identity, sovereign, calculated, pragmatic. And this is a signal not only to the USA. It is a challenge to the entire model of American global leadership. Because if even Canada is stepping back, who's next? What's next? In the coming years, we are likely to see an increase in Canada's defense contracts with Europe and Australia, a refusal to purchase American military equipment, the construction of alternative energy logistics, the strengthening of the Anglosphere Quartet outside the confines of NATO, a gradual drift from the White House to a multi-vector policy. Now it's your turn. Share your opinion. Will Canada become an example for other U.S. allies? And will this quiet drift turn into a real geopolitical avalanche?